So good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, which forms part of our management series for 2023. I am James Wright, one of DG Legal's management and compliance consultants, and I'm joined here today with my fellow consultant, Sarah Charlton. We are also joined today by our guest speaker, David Payne from Blue Zebra Tech Solutions, and you'll hear a bit more about David in a moment. Sarah's career spans over 35 years within the legal finance sector, fulfilling roles from COFA through to CEO. During her career, she has worked with a number of legal regulators, professional bodies, and government organisations. Sarah has been a member of the Institute of Legal Finance and Management throughout her career and also sits on the Executive Council with them. My career in legal finance spans over 25 years, working in medium to large law firms. My knowledge and experience in understanding the SRA accounts rules has enabled me to offer extensive support to the COFA and build processes and procedures to enable compliance. For those of you who haven't joined a webinar before, we will be sending the slides and the recording from today's presentation to you tomorrow. Currently, we're in webinar mode, so unfortunately, we will not be able to see or hear from you. Please use the Q&A functions if you have any questions. Alternatively, use the chat function for anything else. The training should last no more than 20 to 25 minutes to ensure there's enough time to answer any questions that you might have, as we appreciate this is the main advantage of attending a live session. And just an introduction to David. David graduated from the University of South Wales with a BSc Honours degree in Renewable Energy Systems, and is co-founder of two businesses. Zebra EM, which is a software management company that develops and manages software in the renewables and waste industry, and he's also co-founder of Blue Zebra Tech Solutions, which is a full-service tech solution business servicing the professional service sector. Prior to this, he had a number of roles that span from technology centres through to working alongside Sarah Charlton in a law firm. More recently, David has been recognised as a 35 and under 35 winner at the RWM Expo. Project management is one of his main talents that David possesses. Thank you, David, for taking the time to join us today and share with us your experience in managing larger projects. Sarah, over to you.
Great, thanks very much, James. So what exactly are we going to cover today is the big question. So it seems appropriate to start off with looking at the sort of activities within a law firm that might trigger the creation of a project. So in simple terms, this is typically something that will pass through a starting point, a middle point, and an end point. We will then look at the 5 key stages of a project. How much effort you put into each stage of the project is likely to depend on the size of the project itself. And whilst there is a temptation just to look at managing the larger projects via a formal process, there is often value to be had in managing the small to medium-sized projects in a similar way. This is just to ensure that the small to medium-sized projects are still completed and delivered quicker, more efficiently, and often at a lower cost. We will then have a 5-minute Q&A session with David, hosted by James. And then finally, we'll have a look at how you might be able to choose some mitigating risks of the life cycle of a project. So they're the things that we're hoping to cover during the next sort of 20 to 25 minutes. So we're going to kick off with having a look at why projects might be created. It could be the end result of maybe a strategic decision. So perhaps the business might want to increase volumes, create a new department, or it could be a change in regulation or legislation. So an example of this was the 2019 SRA accounts rules changes, where it brought in reconciliation requirements for deputyship accounts, and a lot of software didn't have the ability to be able to actually record deputyship accounts and then be able to produce a reconciliation. So change may have needed to be implemented following the introduction of that regulatory change. It might be driven by operational needs. Perhaps there's a greater efficiency required in a specific department. Perhaps there is going to be a restructure and you're going to have less headcount covering a larger area. Or it could simply be part of an ongoing maintenance or upgrade, and that's typically where you see tech and or infrastructure changes implemented into the business. So I've included within this slide just a couple of headline points on how projects might be categorized within a law firm. Larger projects are likely to have a project initiation document. This is also referred to as a PID, and that will have identified the need for change. So we're going to just have a brief look at what a PID might include, what you should expect from it. So depending on your actual role, you may be asked to create the PID or input into it. Alternatively, depending on what your role is, you may actually be the person responsible for reviewing it and signing it off. If you don't already have a process which requires a PID, it might be something that you'll want to introduce following today's session. So what can you expect to see in it? Well, firstly, I'd like to think that it would be scoped out, and that might include the reasons, any assumptions that you've relied upon. Are there any constraints to the project? Are there any estimates, and what the expected outcome is? Then the why, which will often include the benefits, any options, are there any variables, and typically a cost-benefit analysis, depending on the type of project it is. The how may have identified risks, possible critical success factors, depending on the type of project that you're implementing. The who, that tends to be, it's not a band, the who tends to be used to nominate the project manager, as well as the project team, and finally the project board. And the project board will have the project manager reporting directly into them. Finally, the when, and that will include any relevant key dates, stages, or other milestones, together with the expected completion date. So that's what you'd expect it to be able to capture. So depending on the source of information you have or which academia you follow, the key stages of a project are likely to vary from one to another. So for instance, if you were to complete the Prince qualification, which is well known in project management, then you're likely to learn about the 7 phases of a project. For simplicity, we've included a more broad-brushed approach, including varying terms where possible for each stage to account for those subtle differences that you might encounter depending on what you're looking at. These 5 stages are also the ones that I found worked best for me. So however, you may decide after running a few projects yourself that you'll find it better to be able to amend these key stages. So whether that's taking one out, putting a new one in, or maybe changing it around slightly. So it's not set in stone. There's quite a lot of fluidity about making sure it fits for your business. So we have chatted about the fact that larger projects are likely to have a PID. However, small to medium-sized projects aren't. So one of the fundamental questions you're going to kick off any project with is, what are you trying to achieve? What problem are you trying to solve? So anyone who's been on these management series will know that James and I love audience participation. So please take a couple of minutes to think about what you think problem-wise you might have or might have experienced in your law firm that a project could look to resolve. So please use the chat function just to pop in there a couple of the problems that you've seen, that you've experienced, because it might be a case that we'll pick that up later on in the session. So we just want to get a feel for the sort of things that you're experiencing, whether those are efficiencies, are they changes in legislation or regulation that you feel a project would be well versed at. We tend to find sort of software migration tends to be very much at the top, and that's something that we've all got experience of. Please don't be shy. I don't want to have to nominate someone. Okay. So do carry on having a few minutes to think about it. In the meantime, we've got somebody who is willing to share with us. So office move. Oh, James. It is a really, really good point. And I think that what you should bear in mind when you're managing that sort of project, people perceive projects to be tech projects. They don't really see them as infrastructure. So that is actually a really, really good one. And when you have a project that's well run, it's the difference between it being a very smooth, staff are engaged, staff aren't going to be nervous about future changes. A well-run project can have huge benefits, not just financial benefits, but also cultural benefits and things like that. So here's a few that we came up with. I feel I'm giving you a sort of cheat sheet really, but hey ho. So these are the sort of things that we would expect, or we would have expected to see in the sort of chat room. Needless to say, any objectives that you set yourself, they should ideally follow the SMART principles wherever possible. So that's the sort of principles that you would have: specific, measurable, and so forth. So let's have a look at another stage. If you have access to a team of business analysts, then that's obviously great. This is likely to be the stage where you would commission them. You can actually look at third parties to be able to provide you with BAs. And I think that's something that David would be able to facilitate at Blue Zebra. Their role is to capture any process changes so that these requirements can be agreed and signed off by all the relevant stakeholders. So it's really important that everyone knows what the scope of the project is, where it starts and where it stops. It may well be that a high-level process map might have been created when the PID was generated. So, but that's not always the case. And obviously that wouldn't necessarily apply to small to medium-sized projects. You can use software, things like Microsoft Visio, and that's available to assist you with mapping techniques where you don't have access to a BA, or you might want to do it yourself for various different reasons. If it's a radical business change, then you might need to actually re-engineer parts of the process. And that obviously is going to perhaps create additional variables. So you should be cautious about trying to manage a big project on your own without support. Resource is likely to be a big part of the planning stage. They tend to be more unpredictable than anything else. You should therefore try to factor in annual leave or any planned absences like maternity or paternity leave, and take all of that into consideration. Wherever possible, do try to identify more than one person. So if person A is unexpectedly away, then person B can step in. And James will cover that and chat a little bit more about that at the end of today's session when he's covering mitigating risk. Alternatively, you could go for a good old handwritten workflow. So we're going to have a look at what a flowchart looks like. This is a very simple view of a flowchart, so you can visualize what it's trying to achieve. I went for the light bulb. I didn't want to go for something too complex. Most of us have experienced the troubleshooting of a light bulb, but you might notice that it doesn't just outline the primary route, but instead it also outlines some of the processes at various different testing points. You could actually add to this and incorporate validation rules to ensure people are actually nudged down the right path. So there's lots of things that you can do to build on that. And this is something that if you're in a business meeting that you could literally draw if it's quite a simple section and then agree it and get it signed off there and then. So in relation to the execution and implementation, you'd use this stage to bring people together. You'd bring the project team together. You'd have a look at signing contracts if there's third parties that you're going to rely on. Do they have availability in the window that you're wanting to start the project, or the window that you're going to be needing them? Purchase software, it might be a case that there is extra licenses because you're looking to expand something, or you need to actually just book rooms. So all of those things would be things that you'd be starting to look at to be able to have your start date, go live, and things run smoothly. Keeping control of a project can be difficult, especially when there's multiple variables existing, some of which may be outside of your control. If you have quite a large project team, you also have to manage personalities as well. So you might want to think about jumping on some of our other management series webinars where we've talked about emotional intelligence and managing those difficult conversations to say, I really, really would like you to do that for me as soon as possible. You would use this stage as well to review any project goals that you might have set yourself, any assumptions that you started off with, which might now be known. Any corrective adjustments are also likely to be considered at this point, anything that you need to change. Corrective measures might take the form of additional funding, technical expertise, and so forth. But that's the sort of thing that you would cover in that stage. Then the completion, well, that's obviously going to be a very satisfying stage for the team. And depending on the level of success, you could look at rewarding the team. That would encourage people to volunteer next time for a large project. If you are an organisation that promotes a culture of continuous improvement, which I hope you would be because you're on this webinar at the moment, you could also consider doing a post-project review. And that just evaluates what went well and what might not have gone so well, especially if you've used assumptions. So you can have a look at the accuracy, the data that you use to gain those assumptions, so that you can try to refine that and improve that over future projects. So I'm going to hand you over now to James and David for our Q&A session.
So David, first question from the Q&A. Do you have any tips for those who are new to managing a project?
Yes, I do. So there's quite a few tips that I could give out, but just give some of the key kind of points that are there really. The first one is defining clear objectives. Defining these project goals and objectives, what is desired outcome and what you're trying to achieve, essentially gives them better communication with who you're trying to, what the project outcome is going to be. Second one would be a project plan, detailing these plans, outlining tasks, timelines, and dependencies. You can use tools like Gantt charts to kind of help visualize this a little bit better.
Okay.
And setting realistic expectations. Making sure that you're able to give them the right resources and timeframes and not over-promising. Okay.
Which step do you think is the most crucial one in managing a project, and why?
I would probably say defining clear objectives. You can really align and focus what the project is, measure success, allocate the right resources, scope management, and also communication with stakeholders.
Okay. And what do you think that most people fail to consider when managing a project?
Resource constraint, not adequately considering these, limited budgets or staffing. Quality assurance, trying to get things done on time. The actual quality of it can get quite poor. Legal and regulatory compliance, that's quite relevant here.
Yeah.
And contingency planning is probably one of the biggest.
Okay. And any advice on how you can resolve conflicting tasks?
Prioritizing and scheduling of tasks is probably the right stuff. You can use different frameworks. There's the Eisenhower matrix. You can use Gantt charts as well, and different project management softwares to kind of help. And communication, being open and transparent. And probably one of the key ones is learn to say no to new things coming up.
Okay, that's a key one. Okay, well, thanks, David, for your time.
Sure.
So next, we're going to move on to mitigating risk. So why is mitigating risk important? A poorly run project risks failure, risks the firm not being able to run a full service, lose clients, money, or staff. It's useful to consider any critical success factors so that you can mitigate these in the initiation or planning stage. You might want to consider things like ensuring expectations are realistic, or try to seize partial control or influence over things which may initially be entirely outside of your control. We also discussed in an earlier slide the use of having a backup resource. If person A was not available, you could draw on person B. Good team selection is also going to be key, so you don't be afraid to ask or pick your own team if you are the project manager. So what tools can you use to help you in your project? Your tools are only as good as the quality of the information that you enter into them, as well as the user's ability to interpret and put corrective measures in place. The type of tools that you might use often depend on the size of the project. For larger projects, you're likely to want to use specialist software like Microsoft Project, or as David also mentioned, the Gantt chart. This will assist you in identifying sections which can be run concurrently or sections which rely on another stage of the project to be completed before the next one can be started. As previously indicated, smaller projects could be done using a simple Excel spreadsheet to detail timelines and so forth. You'll be pleased to know that this is the end, and we are happy to answer any questions that you might have. The final session in this management series will be held on Wednesday, the 8th of November, and will cover managing people and change.
Can I just interject there, James? I just wanted to sort of mention that lawyers often, without thinking, regularly use project management skills in order to be able to manage clients' cases. So they're already naturally managing clients' expectations, running inquiries concurrently, and engaging with experts and delivering at different stages of the matter. So you'd probably be surprised actually how much experience unconsciously sits within a law firm naturally that you might be able to tap in, especially if they do commercial and litigation work. I'm really pleased to say that we've got a question from Daniel. So apologies for not clicking on the slide a little bit earlier. It's merely because I was focusing on Daniel's question. So his question to the group is, do you have any tips for extracting information from colleagues who tend to be busy, high-level view workers? And I feel it's unfair that Dave and I answer this because we both have military experience. So maybe our tools and techniques for extracting information might not be legal. No, might not be appropriate. Might not be appropriate. So I just wondered if James or David, if you had any thoughts on that.
So I think from my perspective, I guess, just thinking about any experience that I might have had with that. I mean, typically with projects, they tend to be led from the top, depending on what the actual project is itself. But I think it's quite key to, speak, as we've mentioned during today's session, that actually communication is key. So I think both upwards and downwards within the departments and teams, you do want to communicate with, what the outcomes ultimately you want to be from the project. So, if you're then finding difficulty with people not providing the information because they feel, the project's perhaps not an area they want to get involved with, then I think if you can highlight to them the outcomes and what you're looking to achieve, then hopefully they'll see the benefits and provide you with the information that you need.
Good answer, James. I feel a bit gutted that that's not one that I came up with. Dave, did you have any tips for Daniel?
In my experience, probably just essentially kind of setting really very short meetings, like 5 minutes long, look in their calendar, just try and badger them and say, quick agenda points, what you're trying to get out of them, and try and, make as minimal time for them, if, trying to help with that side.
Brilliant. Excellent. So I sort of would echo what James and David have said. I would say from my experience, I would probably try to highlight what's in it for them. And it's really key that you understand what motivates them. So if it's praise, then something that you can do is sort of whether you send a sort of firm-wide email to say that, Joe Bloggs has agreed to be part of this or signed off, or, and just really big that person up to say how amazing, what a great part of the team they are. So they almost feel peer pressure of not being able to go back and sort of say, well, actually, I'm not going to make time for it. I don't really want to do it because you've just, told the entire firm that they're amazing. So it just sort of feeds into the sort of emotional side of them wanting to do the right thing by everyone. But if you can find out what motivates them, then that's something that you can use to your advantage. And like I would echo Dave's comments about trying to keep it really, really small. And James is, it's got to be led from the top. So if you find the people at the top aren't giving time for it, then it makes it really difficult if you've got middle managers to get them on board because it's not being demonstrated from the top. So hopefully that answered your question, Daniel. Do we have anyone else that would like to ask anything at all before we finish today's session? And we're 4 minutes to spare. Check us out. Excellent. Thank you ever so much for your time today. Really, really appreciate it. We know that you're all busy people, but hopefully you will have taken some little nuggets that you can actually use in your firm, hopefully in the forthcoming future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.